The goal of an innovation is to become adopted within a community as quickly as possible. Have you ever noticed how some ideas or products spread like wildfire and others take a long time to become adopted within society? Here today to discuss Chapter 6, Attributes of Innovation and Their Rate of Adoption, and Chapter 7, Innovation and Adopter Categories of Professor Everett Rogers' book, Diffusion of Innovation, is Lilibeth Telang Cuevas and myself, Robert Lawrence. Without further ado, here is Lilibeth.
Hello, everyone. Within the context of diffusion research, there are two general ideas that came up from reading Everett Rogers' Diffusion of Innovation's book. First concept is that people have differences in innovativeness, and the second concept is when we analyze innovation differences, this gives valuable information in predicting the reactions of people to innovation. These reactions can be modified by the way an innovation is named, positioned, or how it is related to the existing beliefs and past experiences of potential adopters. Understanding how potential adopters perceive new ideas is critical in determining the nature of the diffusion process and also predict the rate of adoption of an innovation. Rogers described rate of adoption as the relative speed which an innovation is adopted by members of a social system. It is measured as the number of individuals who adopted a new idea in a specified period. There are 5 perceived attributes or characteristics of innovation. The selection of these attributes is based on past writings and research. Each perceived attribute is somewhat interrelated but conceptually distinct. Let me start discussing the first attribute, which is relative advantage. Rogers referred this as the degree to which an innovation is perceived as better than the idea it supersedes. The degree of relative advantage is often expressed as economic profitability, and such variables like low initial cost, decreasing in discomfort, conveying social prestige, saving time and effort, or the availability of reward are examples of relative advantages. Offering incentives is considered a diffusion strategy because it increases the degree of relative advantage of the new idea and encourage behavioral change or adoption. However, we all know it does have some ethical implications. The second attribute is compatibility. Roger referred this as the degree to which an innovation is perceived as consistent with the existing values, past experiences, and needs of potential adopters. For example, an innovation can be compatible or incompatible with socio-cultural values and beliefs, with previously introduced ideas, and with client needs for the innovation. For example, a change agent may find it useful to promote a cluster or package of innovations to clients, rather than treat each new idea separately in order to increase adoptability. This is referred to by Roger as technology clusters. Another example is naming an innovation. The name given to an innovation often affects its perceived compatibility, therefore also affects the rate of adoption. The third attribute is complexity. This referred to the degree of which an innovation is perceived as relatively difficult to understand and use. Of course, the more complex the innovation, the less likelihood the innovation will be adopted. An example is when home computers were first introduced, where the individuals who are technologically savvy will adopt the innovation easier than those who are not. The fourth attribute is trialability. Roger referred this as the degree to which an innovation may be experimented with on a limited basis. New ideas can be tried on an installment basis and are generally adopted more rapidly than innovations that are not divisible. A person trying out an innovation and finds out how it works first usually can dispel uncertainty about a new idea. The last attribute is observability. Roger referred this as the degree to which the results of an innovation are visible to others. Some ideas are easily observed and communicated to other people, whereas other innovations are difficult to observe or describe to others. For example, the idea of safer sex recommended to high-risk individuals as a preventative approach. Because the idea of safer sex is ambiguous to some and taboo to others, this preventative innovation has spread at a slower pace with a relatively small percentage of individuals at risk for HIV adopting the innovation. In addition to these perceived attributes, Roger also identified 5 other variables that affect the rate of adoption in innovation. The first one is the type of innovation decision, meaning the more persons involved in making an innovation decision, the slower the rate of adoption. One means of speeding the rate of adoption of an innovation is to attempt to alter the unit of decision so that fewer individuals are involved. The second variable discussed in the book is the nature of communication channels diffusing the innovation at various stages in the innovation decision process. This means that type of communication channel used to create an awareness or knowledge of an innovation, whether it is through interpersonal channels or through mass media channels, also can affect the rate of adoption. The third attribute or variables identified by Roger is the nature of the social system. He referred this as the degree to which communication network structure is highly interconnected and how it influences the rate of adoption. The fourth one is extent of the change agent's promotion efforts in diffusing the innovation. According to Rogers, there is a greater payoff from a given amount of change agent activity that occurs at certain stages in an innovation's diffusion. The greatest response to change effort occurs when opinion leaders adopt, which usually occurs somewhere between 3 and 16% adoption in most systems. In summary, relative advantage, compatibility, trialability, and observability are the 4 attributes perceived by members of a social system as positively related to its rate of adoption, whereas complexity, which is the 5th attribute, is perceived by members of a social system as negatively related to its rate of adoption. To continue on with the discussion, here is Robert Lawrence, who will discuss Chapter 7 on innovativeness and adopter categories. But before he starts, let me give you the first question for this chapter. Pick an innovation. Which of these 5 attributes of innovations exemplify your chosen innovation and the rate of its adoption, and briefly explain why? So let me turn this over to Robert Lawrence.
Hello. In Chapter 7, Professor Rogers discusses innovativeness and adopter categories. Rogers describes innovativeness as where in a society or community there are segments of the population that will adopt a new idea, behavior, or product at different stages. In 1962, Rogers developed adopter categories in order to identify the behavior of individuals' innovativeness of an idea or product. He placed him in one of 5 adopter categories by how early that individual adopted the innovation. Let's go over the attributes of each of the 5 adopter categories. A small but invaluable group is the innovators. Innovators are venturesome, they're risk takers, and always on the cutting edge, seeking new ideas and experiences. This group is usually the ones initiating the new ideas to the rest of the community or society through word of mouth or networks, their friends, such as using social medias, texting, emails, etc. The next group, early adopters, is also small but well respected within their community. This group has the highest degree of opinion leaders and forward thinkers. The early adopters play an important role because their endorsement of an innovation is valued because they make judicious decisions, thereby decreasing the uncertainty of the others within the community or society. Basically, they close the gap between the innovators and the majority of the population. The next 2 groups make up about 2/3 of the majority within a population. These groups are the early majority and the late majority in the diffusion of innovation theory. The early majority is deliberate and takes time to observe experiences of others to discover the minuses and the pluses before committing to that innovation. They want insurance that the innovation has become the status quo of the community. The late majority is more skeptical and only adopts when it's economically feasible or when they are under peer pressure. I actually put my wife in this category because she's resistant to change. An example is it took her several years to change from a flip phone to a smartphone. And now she can't live without her smartphone. She's texting all the time. She only changed after pressure from her family and friends and the fact that the companies were phasing out her old phone. The last group to adopt an innovation is called laggards. They're also called traditionalists. This group is highly resistant to change and won't change until the innovation is mainstream. They believe why change something that's not broke, or we've always done it this way. Some people are just placed in this category because they are isolated from the main community, and it might take several years for the innovation to reach them through normal media exposure. Others just don't adopt the innovation at all, such as in the Amish population. In this chapter, Rogers also describes 26 generalizations of the 5 adopter categories and organizes them under 3 headings. The first being a socioeconomic status heading. Rogers describes early adopters as being more liberal or literate, with more years of formal education. They're more literate. They have a higher social status. They're more willingness to move forward up in status. Early adopters are also wealthier. They have larger size units, such as their farms or corporations. The inconsistency within this category is age. Research has noted that there is no difference in relating age with innovativeness. I would have thought different because the young are more apt to take risk, and they find it easier to adapt to change, especially when discussing today's technological age. The personality variables, the second heading, are difficult to measure in the association with innovativeness. Therefore, there has not been much research. That being said, Rogers generalizes earlier adopters as having more empathy, less dogmatic, and a greater ability in dealing with abstractions. They have a more favorable attitude toward change and science. They have the ability to cope with risks and uncertainty. In the final heading, communication barriers, earlier adopters are more sociable and interconnected within their own social system, as well as outside their social system. They have a greater exposure to mass media. They're more connected to the actual change agents, as well as communication channels. These independent variables describes are scored higher, meaning that earlier adopters have a more positive innovativeness. What I found most intriguing in this chapter is that change agents will seek a strategy of least resistance, such as in the elite within the system. Those that are willing to adopt or reject an innovation are the elite, that is the wealthy, intelligent adopters with a multitude of resources for adopting to change, but are not necessarily the ones with a multitude of resources for adopting change, but are not necessarily the ones who need the change. Unlike the less socioeconomic laggards, they may benefit in adopting an innovation, but they are less likely or they are reluctant to actually change or adopt that innovation for whatever reasons they have. Rogers describes this innovation, this as an innovation needs paradox. The personal computer or access to the internet throughout the last couple of decades has become more common throughout society. This process is actually closing that gap of the innovativeness needs paradox. Now, think of these adopter categories I discussed and your innovativeness with the advancement of global innovations such as online banking, online shopping, solar energy, and the quickness of the widespread social media. Describe your innovativeness and which of the 5 adopter categories you find yourself and why. Personally, I find myself in the earlier adopters. I might not be the first one to actually jump on an innovation, but I'm usually one of the first ones that actually grab that innovation and is willing to try it more and more. So therefore I could accept or reject it based off of my own personal findings. And usually I have friends and family that come to me and ask me about what do I think about such and such, as in what we're talking about, the innovation. So I find myself more into that category, whereas my wife being a late adopter. Thank you.
Well, that is really interesting, Robert, because when I was reading through the book as well, I evaluated myself and I thought, well, sounds like I'm 50% early adopter and 50% an innovator. Because a lot of times, I would try to come up with something new, especially with planning events. I want something interesting, and also an early adopter like what you just described. So what I realized that every one of us has personal variables that actually influences on our thought process or how we behave as far as what category we belong. And it's truly valuable to know or do a self-assessment. And out of knowing this, it easily leads you to whether you'll be able to undertake something that will be successful or not. Don't you agree?
Most definitely. Actually, Rogers actually describes his theory in the market of today. A lot of market analysis is based off of his theory of the diffusion of innovations. So they discover which part of the population belongs into which of those categories, and you try to market your innovation into that specific category to allow that community to adopt. So if you know an innovator who is always jumping on it, so you actually know they're going to spread it around, but you want to get more people involved, so you would actually try to redevelop a market strategy for, say, like the late majority or the early majority. And that's usually when the prices are starting to come down on a cell phone or coming up with a new plan for your cell phone and so forth. So it's actually a very good marketing strategy in the way the theory of the diffusion of innovation is set up. So it's actually remarkable. I found that to be interesting.
Okay, well, I guess this is the end of our presentation, and we will be posting all the questions in our blog. So in case you did not catch it, we will type it for you when we attach this video. So we hope that you enjoy our short presentation, and we welcome all your comments. Have a really good day. Bye, Robert.
Bye. Thank you.